Okay, so we should be back up. Let me know
Okay.
if you see it. But that looks like it's working. So, sorry about that rough start.
No, it's all right. It was a dry run. Going off and on here. Okay. I'm seeing you back.
All
Yeah,
right.
yeah, I do see you now.
Sweet. Well, I don't know how much of that we
Might as
covered
well just start
already.
over. I don't think they heard
but-
any of it.
Okay, well, welcome. I'm Jonathan Lampel. This is Kent Trammell over on that side. And we're going to be talking about texturing weapons in Substance, talking about our first-person shooter game that we're working on, and all sorts of stuff. So we'll just have a good chat. And if you have any questions about any of this, either modeling weapons, if you've taken that course and you had specific questions about that, or want to talk about Substance in general, how to work with that and Blender, whatever you want to ask about. So yeah, let's get started. Kent, what's on the agenda first?
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about kind of interview style you for your course. Now, in case you haven't picked up on this, someone had the suggestion that when we release a new course, we should promote it similar to the way actors do like their movies. So they like come on late night shows and they talk about. I mean, they talk about the movie that's coming out, but also just like their personal life. I don't know. It's a fun way to do this. So that's kind of the
have
idea.
Award shows and everything,
Oh yeah. If these are any good, we should do that. Awesome. So yeah, your new course that came out. So I was typing in the chat. Did you describe it all, like generally what the course is about? I mean, if it's not obvious.
Oh yeah, sure. So in the first, I don't know, we've been doing a lot of first-person shooter courses since we're making a first-person shooter. And one of the things that was the first one that I did was modeling weapons. And so this is sort of the next step to that, and it's now texturing them. So we've already modeled them, we've already normal mapped them. This is just bringing that into Substance and getting them textured and then exporting it out to Unity. So it's sort of the second step in the weapons part there. And yeah, actually I can show you. Let me just switch over my screen. Okay, so this is what we modeled in the first course, and this is the low poly version, but there's also a normal map on it when you export it to Unity. And then in this course, we'll take a look at our rocket launcher, which is pretty awesome, and it's a lot of fun to texture. And then we also have another weapon that I made in between, because what I wanted to do, well, I'll show you in Substance Painter itself, is since these are all going to be loaded in the game at the same time, I wanted to make sure that they're all part of one large texture. And so in order to actually get the rocket launcher painted, I had to combine all the UVs for all of the weapons that we were going to have. So I had to model them anyway. So even though we're mainly working with the rocket launcher in this particular course, they're all sort of here just because they all need to be part of the same UV map. But that kind of gives you a glance over all of them. And let me go back to Blender. So yeah, we have a rocket launcher. This is what we'll be texturing. And then there's also a rifle, which doubles as a sniper rifle, and we'll be doing a different course with this one, which should be super fun too.
Absolutely. If you guys haven't seen the trailer for the course, I highly recommend you watch that. It's pretty cool. And one of the coolest aspects is this paint drip effect, specifically about the trailer, that I thought was a really neat touch to show, that this is going from a gray model to a textured and shaded final, asset. So like how'd you just create that effect? What was, general process for that?
That was super fun. So the effect itself wasn't too hard. I used dynamic paint and a bunch of particles. So it was like raining down on top of the rocket launcher. And then the particles would create like a wet map for black and white. Whatever's white would be, paint, and whatever is black would be just regular clay render. And then mix the two based on that map in cycles, and there we go. So it actually wasn't too bad. Yeah.
Yeah,
dynamic paint is
it's an
super
impressive
cool
effect. I like it. Cool. So we got a quick question in the chat from in Leonard. How big is the UV map?
The UV map,
maybe texture size.
Oh yeah, so the texture size is 4K, because these are going to be super close to your face when you're I mean, when you're having an FPS, it's like it's right there on screen all of the time, and parts of it are really close. So for all three weapons, it's 4K total, and yeah.
So Duke to go. You just said that you came here for substance. Don't worry, we're going to be focusing on that a lot in this stream. So
sure.
And segueing right into my next question, when it comes to 3D education, we prioritize Blender over other apps. If you guys haven't been able to tell, we are primarily a Blender-based place. So then, Lampel, like, why choose Substance for this particular workflow?
Yeah, I don't know, we focused on Blender mostly in the past because it's a really good all-in-one. You can do lots of stuff with it. But at the same time, its texturing is a bit lacking. And, we want to teach what's, either best for the person who's using it or teach the best workflows. And so something that a lot of professionals are doing, so we may as well do that as well. So it's still working with Blender and, combining it with other software, but there's no reason to stick in Blender for everything.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Texturing is lacking in Blender, and especially compared to Substance, which is an unbelievably productive app for all things texturing. And it's been a godsend to the game industry for certain, but also, other aspects of 3D animation. So, we'll use Photoshop over, I guess you could theoretically paint in Blender, like paint sort of like Photoshop on 2D canvas, but Photoshop is just way better for that. So while we prioritize Blender, sometimes, you just got to go with another app. And this is one of those situations. And if you've ever used Substance, you know what we're talking about. If not, watch the course and you'll see just how powerful it is. I'm personally kind of hoping that Blender reverse engineers as much as they can from Substance. But
that would be pretty cool. I know that's on the plan to do some of that stuff. But yeah, it just seemed like we would be kind of like shortchanging our members if we weren't teaching what the best workflow is,
Yeah, and what I like about you, Lampel, is you are, like, you've used Substance before, so you just were able to incorporate that right in. It legitimizes the education, especially in terms of game art. Like that, at this point, I'm sure Substance is a bit of an expectation. I personally have been teaching Blender so long and been trying to teach everything in Blender, and so my texturing stuff is with Blender,
right?
And we're covering both bases. But like, even though I'm not going to say that texturing in Blender is better than Substance, it's possible with more pain, but Substance is a better app. But I do like that we teach both of them and we give you both.
Yeah, totally. And just to give context there, Kent's robot course, he has a robot modeling course, and then when he textures it, that'll be in Blender. So yeah, if you follow along with the FPS, you'll get both workflows. Yeah,
that's true. And it was a particularly painful process with the robot as I watched you texture the weapon. So I got to figure out how to teach that well. All right, so next question.
Sure.
What kind of license does Substance bring into the game? Being Blender users primarily here, we're used to free. What is it like with Substance?
It has so there is a monthly subscription that you can get. I don't remember offhand. It's not super expensive. I think it's maybe like $30 a month. And then you'll get all of the updates going forward, or you can buy a perpetual license, and that'll just last you for whatever. So they used to have a really cool like rent to own type deal where you would pay the subscription, but once you hit a certain amount of once you hit a certain point, then you could just keep the software and you wouldn't have to pay anymore. But now since they're doing the update thing, like the 2017 .1 or .2, whatever, just like Unity's doing, and I think, I don't know, Maya is doing that too, and
right, it's definitely the trend. For sure. So quick question from David Frazier. Jonathan, are you familiar with Bill, who's Blender Brit is his kind of alias, the shader node that he created for Substance to Blender, like that specific node? He's asking
is that the one on the Blender Market? I'm familiar with Blender Brit. It sounds super familiar, and I remember a couple of those shaders, but there's a lot of them out there, so I don't know which
Okay.
specific one he's talking about?
I tried to do a quick search and it didn't take me anywhere particular. So yeah,
Okay.
I'm not sure about that, if it's on the Blender market or not. But yeah, there are a bunch of them out there, and they're all really, really useful.
Yeah, I mean, the one on the Blender market is fantastic. Though now I don't know if it's as useful as it was with the principled shader. One of the questions that I got on the community was, what shader do you use to make things look as similar in Blender as they did in Substance? And I just use the principled shader now. It's super easy. I have a picture here. I'm going to drag that over. So this was in the 2.79 update. So you may have seen this before, but it just compares Blender principled shader to Substance Painter. And there are some minor differences, but that's to be expected because they're two completely different rendering types.
Right.
But they look really similar.
Oh yeah, definitely.
The roughness and all of that stuff is quite close. So
that's great.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Beyond that, I'm not too picky, so I'll just use that since it's easy and fast.
Included, yeah, definitely. So my last question was, did you learn anything new during the creation of the course, whether about Substance, how it interacts with Blender, or are you an all-knowing expert and you knew all this stuff before you got into it?
No, I learned a ton of stuff. That's the fun part about making courses, is digging into the stuff that I didn't know and figuring it out. I don't know. Do you have that same thing when you teach a course?
Oh, absolutely. That's one of my favorite parts of, I guess, being a teacher, is how much it forces you to learn and keep expanding on what you know. I guess there could be a rut of like just sticking to what you know and never. I mean, we probably all had teachers like that who didn't seem to love what they were doing and just going through the motions. But I do. I mean, for an example, is the robot course. I haven't recorded the texturing thing yet, texturing course yet. But man, it was a crash course of the best kind. What I learned from research and developing that course. So yeah, definitely. I like to ask, or I like to hear from educators like what they learned.
Yeah, totally. I learned. I mean, since I'd used the basics before, and we don't really dig into anything super crazy in this course. There's nothing ridiculous about it, but at the same time, just, I don't know, getting more familiar with things and seeing what the updates are, what's in the latest version, stuff like that. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
You say that nothing ridiculous happens. When I was watching through your course myself, coming from Blender, and you see like, oh, I can bake a cavity map, and I can immediately limit like rust details to either crevices or scratches to corners and edges.
Yeah,
it's just like, okay, mind is blown. Even though that's like standard procedure for Substance, if this is your first exposure to Substance, your mind will be blown with the basic stuff.
It's so much faster to work with. Like all of the stuff that you'd have to manually paint is just, a lot of it's really automatic, and then that's when you can actually get creative. That's what I like about it, is having those automatic things. It's not something that you should rely on totally. It'd be like, okay, I'll just slap this on and then I'm done. But it gives you such a better foundation, so then you can start being actually creative instead of having to worry about all the details.
Yeah, I definitely picked up on like the prospect of that being true with Blender. Like with trying to emulate some of Substance, like basic functions. In Blender, you're just fighting a lot with the technical things of baking out a map, saving it as a texture, plugging it into the right place, and then using it as you intended to. So, I mean, it's very doable. I'm not bashing Blender, and like I still teach that way, but Substance is just such a breath of fresh air. It's so tailored to a texture painter's workflow.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to compare it to modeling, maybe it's a little bit like comparing polygon modeling to sculpting, where in sculpting you can kind of just forget about the technical stuff for a bit and just focus on the form. It's sort of like that, where some things you just don't have to worry about, and it'll work out.
Yeah, absolutely. Good deal, man. Well, if anyone else has questions about the course, please post them in the chat. And I just saw that Michal got here, and she's asking, what did she miss? And we just talked about the course that was released today, and some general questions about that. So you haven't missed too much, though. I hope that information was interesting to you guys. But that's all the questions I had for Lampel. But yeah, if you've got any, please ask them. Okay, we just got one. In your opinion, how much does a beginner need to learn texturing in Substance? Okay, so maybe a beginner in Blender, how important is it to learn Substance as a beginner in Blender, maybe?
I mean, it depends on what you want to go for. Really, if you're a beginner in Blender, I wouldn't worry about it too much. I would just worry about just modeling.
Yeah,
like that's hard enough as it is. You don't need to learn like a whole bunch of apps. And somebody was saying that there was a critique forum or a critique thread in the forum, and somebody was asking what they could do to improve, and one of the responses was like, lighting and in texturing and stuff. But at a base level, I think they just needed to improve their modeling first. Like all those things would have helped, but modeling is so important that if you're a beginner, just focus on that for a bit, and that'll immediately throw you ahead of all of the other people that are like kind of waiting around and all that stuff. I think that'd be the best first thing. But it's also fun. Like if you want to get like a really quick result that looks kind of cool, then yeah, you can throw it into Substance, and it's super helpful to learn. But only do it if you're interested in. Don't feel like you have to or whatever.
Yeah.
But if it seems exciting to you, then yeah, go for it. Totally.
Right. I have another couple questions for you, but I'm curious about, Lampel, what your experience is like. For me, when I got into 3D, like at the beginning stages, and this was at college, I remember I just wanted to install every 3D app possible. And like, and looking back, I would literally just like import a model between the packages, rotate around, tab into their edit mode, move a vertex. And I just loved being in different apps for some reason. It was such a, like, I don't know if you experienced like wanting to do that as well, but it was completely useless. Like it didn't help me at all. It was just a distraction. Did you ever run into that?
That's funny. No, I don't think I ever did. I might have, maybe just because I didn't have that many apps to download. I had Blender and I had the student versions of the Autodesk software. So I would try stuff in like 3ds Max and Maya and Mudbox back in the day when people used to use that.
Man, but, you don't see much of that anymore.
Yeah, but I don't know. I didn't really do that too much.
Okay, so you stayed maybe took the better path of like focusing on what you just said, like become a better modeler, focus on this underlying skills that transcend software. Whereas I was kind of bouncing around like, I got 10 apps installed.
I wouldn't say that. I think the first thing that I really liked was just lots of the particle simulations and like the physics and whatever. So for some reason, whenever I downloaded an app, I would try to figure out that and be like, okay, let's see if I can get a smoke sim going, because it took like 0 skill and looked kind of cool. So that's what I was always interested in.
I got you.
So I totally put off the modeling thing. I was like, I'll do that later.
Who needs that? Okay, a couple more questions for you. Let's see. In your opinion, okay, how much prior knowledge of Substance do I need before tackling this course?
Not very much. Maybe a little bit. Like you should be able to navigate around and know how to work with the layers and stuff. But other than that, it should be fine. It's pretty fundamental, yeah. Like you haven't really used Substance before, but were you able to follow along pretty closely?
You're asking me?
Understand? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, okay. Right. I've never used it before, but getting into it, it made pretty quick sense to me. Like I wasn't like, wait a minute, I'm completely lost. Like I need to know this stuff. Like it just, I don't know. Once you're around enough 3D apps, like you can kind of, I would say totally getting into it is you don't need a lot of experience. Yeah. I mean, if you've used Photoshop before, a lot of the things are, in terms of just the layers and stuff are similar. Yeah. I didn't really go over too much the different types of layers or the different, so we have like the base color and all these different channels. I didn't go over that too much. We mostly just worked with one channel, so that might be something you might want to get familiar with, but I did switch a couple times. Other than that, you should be fine if you know like the very basics. Yeah, I completely agree with that. A question from David: did you find problems with your texturing looking great in Substance viewport, but then looking very different, way too glossy, specifically in Blender?
No, I didn't. Not with the principal shader. I know that I did have my own PBR shader that we made in Shader Forge, and if you do that, you do have to do the glossiness conversion with a power of 2, I believe, on the gloss map. But yeah, I plugged mine into the principal shader and it seemed to work. But yeah, you can always adjust it if it seems different.
Thanks.
Yeah, I didn't really notice too much.
One more question from Omar. He's asking you, where did you go from 0 to hero in Substance?
0 to hero? Well, Algorithmic has their own YouTube channel with all the basics and whatever. So I just watched through their videos. And that's kind of why I figured we don't need to have a whole introduction to Substance on the site. It would just be reworking what they've already done. And, they're obviously the authority on their own software. So if you want a refresher, just check that out. But if you want to see how it works specifically with Blender, then you can check out this course.
Was that the Algorithmic site, or was it a YouTube channel that those videos are?
Yeah, it's on their YouTube channel. They're not particularly well organized, but they're pretty easy to find. Okay,
cool. Yeah, I think that helps. Sweet. So I think that's all the questions I see.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, okay, that's the last one. Awesome. So from here, Lampel, did you want to hop into Substance and, play around with it, do some texturing and kind of overview it?
Sure. I'll sort of walk through a basic overview of sort of what we did in the course. So we already have the rocket launcher done, but we can either look at the pistol or something. So the first thing that we did is explode everything out. So when you would want to export something to Unity, you'd of course want it to look like a complete object. But when we're texturing, we have to blow everything up. And this is kind of fun, but it's a good first step. So whatever you do a game asset, you're going to want to do this, especially if it has moving parts. So you don't have to do this if things aren't moving around a bunch, but since these guns do have a lot of things that move, for example, on the pistol, you got the slide at the top. You've got some of these barrels that hinge up and down, whatever, and a lot of things that move. And so if you were to texture it like that, you'd either forget because it's inside the mesh and you wouldn't really think about it, or when you bake the ambient occlusion, things are going to look super weird because it's going to be all intersecting and whatever, and so when it moves, it'll look super inaccurate. So the best thing to do is just to split it out all like this, and then from there we just export it to Substance, pull it up over here, and I can show you how I organize my layers. Really, we just used a couple smart materials and then adjusted them, so we didn't make our own smart materials or anything in Substance Designer. We just used what the default already was and adjusted them. So there's so many good defaults already. All of the hard work was done for us in that regard.
On that point, Lampel, actually, could you explain what the difference is between Designer and Painter? Sometimes it's confusing even to me.
Oh yeah, sure. So Designer is where you'd create your procedural materials. So think about in Cycles when you have a group node that has a whole bunch of settings inside of it, and you can change things procedurally. Like you have a really good wood texture. I think that's even on the Blender market. That's all procedural, and you just combine it into one group node.
Right.
So think of that group node as the output of Designer, and then that's what you'd plug into Substance Painter, and you can tweak all of those settings. But the actual procedural generation part of it would all be in Designer.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, so the engine that they use is all shared between the two, and so you can plug that in.
That's brilliant, man. The procedurals I see people getting out of Substance are highly skeptical. I mean, they look
it's insane.
So custom painted. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, they have so many nodes. It's fantastic.
Wow. Love to see that in Blender one day.
Oh, yeah. So here in the project, I can show you my layers setup. Yeah, we just have a few different smart materials. I guess I shouldn't have zoomed in on the pistol if we're going to look at the layers. So I just started out with a base material, just a very simple metal, gunmetal, and then just layered a few things on top of that. So we have a lighter steel, have painted metal, and a little bit of rubber for the grip and handles and stuff like that, and then a few layers of details. But one thing that I tried to do when working with these hard surface assets and things that, these don't need to blend into each other that much. So I just used fill layers and paint effects, and that way things can be completely non-destructive. And I think that's just the most important part, is just we have all of these different layers, but instead of painting them on or off, I'm using masks. So I guess not on the base layer here, but let's say we take a look at the light steel. Instead of painting either on the steel itself or on the mask, I'm using a paint effect on the mask, and that way I can really easily adjust. Oop, that's the wrong key. There we go. Yeah, so I can paint in or out for this mask and decide where I want that particular material.
Nice.
All that stuff, but that's happening not on the mask itself, but on the paint effect on the mask, so that I can have essentially layers and layers of different paint effects, and some could be for masking out areas where I want to put in stamps, or others could be masking in other like scratch details or whatever. So it's really pretty much unlimited in its flexibility, and it's all completely non-destructive.
So what do you mean non-destructive? Well, like, that used to be a confusing term to me.
Sure. So if let me make a new layer here. Sorry, my tablet's like way on the other side, so in the setup I'm like reaching way over. Okay, so if I make a new layer, and I just started painting on this, so this would be destructive. So I'm painting directly on the layer with my brush, and I can choose different materials here. So let's say I take alien skin, and I want to paint this with alien skin. So I can do that, and then I can choose a different material and paint on that same layer with something totally different. But the problem with this is you can't really change these things afterwards. The different attributes, either in, if I painted copper, I can't change the color of the copper, I can't change the roughness of it afterwards. All I can do is just look at this, as it is, and I can change it beforehand before I apply it, but once I apply it, it's done. I can't change any of the procedural settings. It's, I can't move anything around. So that would be working destructively, because once you lay something down, you can't change it. So I guess destructive is sort of a weird word for it, because you're not destroying anything, but you're making something that's either irreversible or very hard to reverse. And so non-destructively is, working with masks, working with paint effects, and that way you can always change things later. And it's very easy. If you make a mistake, you can super easily adjust that without affecting anything else. And that way, it's just a lot faster.
Yeah, that makes total sense. It totally changed my workflow to realize how maintaining a non-destructive workflow in any sense is a huge help.
Especially with modeling too. I mean,
absolutely.
Non-destructive modeling and working with masks in Photoshop. Now I have to do it wherever I can.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. A question for you in the chat: is there a way to import a spec map in Substance? I was working on a character whose hair I painted in Blender, but then converted the color to grayscale for spec. But when I tried to work with it in Substance, it was making the whole thing shiny.
Ooh, that's a good question. I do not know.
Do they call them spec maps? And maybe it just means like glossy, like reflectivity kind of thing. I don't know if a spec was a special type of map.
Right. Well, I would assume a specular map. Because usually I work in like the metalness workflow here. Let's see. Is it under project configuration? We can't change it there. I think I'd have to do it when I create a new project. But I know you can pick the specular workflow. However, I don't know if you can just put in a map. Yeah, I'm not sure off the top of my head, but if you ask that in the community, then I can actually go through and look that up for you and then answer that.
Gotcha.
Because I've never had to do that before, but it makes total sense.
Let's see. Then there's a question from Frederick. Emission maps, maybe? Question mark.
Yeah, you can do emission maps.
Okay.
Yeah, I had one on an earlier version of the gun, but it looked kind of weird, so I deleted that. But yeah, you can, if you ever want a different map, you can add it here. Let's see.
Oh, David might have the answer. He's saying choosing the proper substance painter workflow at the beginning of a new project. So maybe Chetan Ranjan, if you maybe chose a different workflow at the beginning that didn't support spec, maybe that's what happened. I'm guessing, frankly, here.
That could be. I know there's a setting here, and I'm completely blanking, which is... I know it's here. Ah, that's embarrassing. Okay, so there's definitely a way. So you add these different channels here. So you have your color, height, roughness, metal, normal. And there's a really easy way to just add extra ones. And so you can add specular, you can add your emission, and make sure that you're painting on just that with these different toggles. But for some reason, I can't remember where to add those. That's funny.
Man, you don't know substance at all.
I know. What am I doing?
I don't think it's that big of a deal.
Oh, no, here we go. Texture set settings. And then you can add a new one. So you have your channels here. And once you add a new one, then you can add ambient occlusion, blending mask, diffuse, displacement, glossiness. Okay, so here we go. And then you can even set your own user-defined ones. So yeah, here's where you'd add different maps. And I believe if you add one, so let's say for specular, you'd add that there in the texture set settings, and then you should be able to add a texture to that. So yeah, there we go. We figured it out.
Nice, man. In real time, too. That doesn't always happen.
Well, I should have known that before.
But imagine if you start with like a PBR-based workflow from the beginning, it creates all those maps that you typically need.
Mm-hmm.
There's not much need to create the new ones like that.
Yeah, well, generally you're not working with emissions and stuff, so that is a case where it is really helpful to know.
Yeah, definitely. So we've got a special request from Omar, and he's at like every stream we've ever done, so maybe we could do this for him. But he's asking, is it too much to ask for a small demo, like export the default cube from Blender, draw a happy face in Substance,
okay,
and then I think go back to Blender maybe?
Sure, I can do that. So, you want just default cube? Or I guess, we could do it with the pistol since it's already right here.
Right, that works.
And I'll make a happy face. So, once you have your model, you have it exploded, make sure all the movable parts are in separate places, then you can just go to File, Export, and I like to use FBX. I don't think Substance really cares that much whether it's FBX or OBJ, but for some reason, I always like FBX. And then just make sure you have selected objects turned on here in the bottom left. And I realized that my video is blocking anything that I'm doing in that bottom left.
But you can probably get rid of me if you want. My voice, my face.
One sec. Okay. Now we're invisible. We're ghosts. Okay, so just make sure that in the properties here you have selected objects turned on, otherwise it'll export the entire scene and make a big mess in Substance. But other than that, apply whatever modifiers that you need to have applied. If you do that beforehand or afterwards. Right now I only have mirror modifiers on, so I'll make sure that that's applied, but if you have something like arrays or whatever, you might want to uncheck that. And then I'll just put it on my desktop right now and export FBX. So it's pretty simple. And then bring it into Substance. We can make a new project. And then here's where you can select the template. So whatever you're working on, whether it's metallic roughness or specular, anything like that. Usually I'll use Unity since we're working for Unity. So let's select that. Though the Unity export does make it a little bit weirder when you import back into Blender, but let's go with the Unity anyway, and then I can show you how that happens. And then select the mesh. Okay, and then OpenGL for the texture format, or the normal map format, because that's what Unity and Blender use. We don't have UDIM in Blender, but I hear that it's coming, which should be super exciting. And then document resolution, I'll keep at 2K just for now, but that's something that we can always change later, which is really cool since it remembers every single stroke that we do. It can upscale later as we export, which is insane. And then,
Wow.
Yeah, click OK. And there we go. So once that's in, then let's add a smart material. What color does Omar want the gun to be?
Oh, yeah. Omar, your favorite color. We need to see that in the chat.
Yep. It's crucial.
So we got from Duke to go. This is what I wanted to see. Exporting exporting. Okay, this is what I wanted to see. Period. Exporting FBX is better than a Blender file? Question mark.
Then loading a straight Blender file into Substance? Yes.
Yeah, can you do that? Okay.
I've honestly never tried that, but even if I did, then you wouldn't be able to use the export only selected, and so you'd be loading your entire file, and when you're working with lots of objects, it's really impractical.
Yeah, absolutely. So Omar's favorite color is red, and so on that note of importing actual blend files, like Unity offers that option, but it's actually running an FBX exporter in the background.
Yes.
So yeah, it's like it's a mirage. So in that sense, it's kind of cool, but like you might as well just go straight to the source and do an FBX yourself.
Totally. And on that note, same with texture formats. I've had that asked, and I've wondered that myself, especially when importing things into Unity, is they have their own texture format that they automatically convert everything to. So whether you're using a PNG or a TIFF or whatever, it's automatically going to convert it anyway, which can be kind of annoying sometimes, but don't get super hung up on that either.
Right.
But yeah, so once we have this inside of Substance, then I can drag and drop my normal map in, and whatever other maps that I have. So here in my files, I just have my 32-bit EXR normal map, and I can drag and drop that in and define that as a texture. Import it for, I'll just do current session since this is a practice, but otherwise you can import it to the project and click import. And that's one of the questions that I got on the community by Artex, I think is how you say that. But he asked the thing about the 32-bit float normal maps and exporting it to EXR. We had a blog post about that, and he was wondering how Substance influences how that conversion works between Blender and getting it into Unity and with the 32-bit and all that stuff. But Substance handles that really well, actually. So there's no weird conversion that you have to do, because when you convert it to Unity, you first have to bring it into Photoshop, convert it back down to an 8-bit to dither it, fill in some of the gaps there, and then bring it into Unity. So it's sort of a hassle. But if you're working in Substance, it can read the 32-bit totally fine, bring that in, and then you can export from there as an 8-bit, and it all just works. So it kind of removes any of that hassle. Okay, so I think the live stream is either taking up a lot of RAM or something, because it's taking a while to load, but that's okay. Let's see. So it will just show up here. What's that?
Are you still green on the stream?
Oh yeah, we're still good. It's just my previews here aren't loading.
Oh, I see.
Which is fine. Right. I just have to actually go through and read
Remember the name.
Okay, here we go. Should have seen that. Okay, so once you have your normal map in there, then you can go to your texture set settings and drag and drop that right into your normal map. And now it's applied. So now you can paint on that, and it'll also affect any layers that are influenced by your normal map, some of the procedurals might be able to take that into account, and so you can just drag and drop that right in there. And I can do that as well for the ambient occlusion, in case you need to see that twice. Pull that in, define it as a texture, choose what you want to import it to, and click import. So all this stuff is pretty self-explanatory. Once you get the workflow down, it's super quick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I can drag and drop that to the ambient occlusion slot, and we're good.
Okay, a question from Rtex. Do you always bake the normal map in Blender beforehand, not in Substance Painter?
Yes, that is true. And that was another question from you on the community. So I have my list of what you asked, and that was on there. So yeah, I always bake it in Blender first. A couple reasons. So the first and biggest reason is it's the most flexible. Especially when there's lots of parts to this, especially with the guns, there's lots of cage objects to worry about and all that stuff. It's definitely a hassle with if something goes wrong and if something is just not quite right for whatever reason, jumping back into Blender and then fixing it and then jumping back into Substance, then baking it again is just a huge pain. So I'll just do it all in Blender. That way I can fix anything super quickly, rebake, it's good to go, throw it in Substance. And the second reason is just because I can also edit the UV layout in there, and yeah, pretty much. And it does just as good of a job. I haven't really seen any good reasons to use one over the other in terms of quality. So yeah, I'll just do it in Blender and then pop it in here. But then everything else, of course, the curvature and all that stuff, I will bake in Substance. Actually, I can do that while we're talking.
Can you also explain a curvature map? I think it's kind of like what I've always called an edge map, like just trying to isolate edges versus crevices.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So it's essentially like a like concave, convex map, where in Blender you have your edge, the edge node. What is it? The
pointiness.
Pointiness. Thank you. So that'll only find your convex points, or wherever's pointy, but it won't find your cavities. So this is a map that just does both.
That's awesome.
And it'll map the whole thing in between.
Man, I needed that for the sci-fi helmet course, and I went through this janky method of like inverting the mesh and baking out an ambient occlusion map. It was pretty crazy. Okay. Curvature would have been nice.
Yeah, so once you just hit bake textures, I'll uncheck the ones I don't need. I did bake the ambient occlusion in Blender as well, and that's something I covered in the course, and why I did that, I'll go into more detail. But yeah, essentially I also find ambient occlusion much better to bake in Blender, especially with the movable parts. So then once you check all the things that you need, you can just hit the output size and click bake, and it'll take a couple minutes, and then automatically fill that out over on the right. Yeah, any other questions while we wait?
Yes. So from Michal, does Substance Painter come with a nice a good amount of normal maps? I can use brushes and such like Photoshop, or let's see, I can use brushes and such, but like, does it have good defaults like Photoshop? I think it's asking, she's asking, does Substance Painter have a lot of good default normal map options?
Yes.
For normal map brushes.
For brushes, yeah, it has quite a few. So here in the shelf, also I believe it's he, not she, by the way, I think. Anyway.
Oh, shoot. Dang it, I could have sworn it was she.
That's okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's plenty of different tools. So here in the shelf, oops, I didn't mean to drag that out. There's all different types of things. So if we go to, yeah, where am I? I'm in textures. It has all sorts of normals automatically. Wow. Sorry, one sec. Okay, so it has all sorts of normals that we can use and just sort of stamp into the surface already applied here. But we can also just use either procedurals to stamp like displacement. So it does displacement and normals a bit differently, but when you export it, it's all gets converted to the normal map. But you can use displacement separately and use black and white images as well. So you can use either procedurals for that, or you could use other textures or alphas. So you have a ton of alphas here that you can use, which is super helpful. And there's tons of packs online too, especially Gumroad and whatnot, that you can find on ArtStation. And so you just have tons of different things that you can scroll through, and all different sorts of sci-fi or alien stuff. And yeah, so tons of brushes, tons of options. And then there's also brushes themselves, which there are quite a few. So yeah, there's so many things, so many defaults that, yeah, you'll rarely have to make your own. But if you do, that's also really easy. So if you have your own combination of something that you like, for example, if you choose one of these brushes, I gotta choose layer here. So if I choose one of these brushes and I want to use a different alpha, I can erase it here and choose one. And if I want to change any of these settings, the jitter, whatever, you can always just go ahead and save this by right-clicking and create tool preset, and then you can find that specific configuration in your tools section of the shelf. So one example of a tool is a screw bolt. So if I take that, and that's just a preset of all of these different settings. Oh, it's underneath the layer. There we go. Yeah, I can just paint screws, or if I choose one of these other ones, it's just presetting all the defaults, but these can be completely customized, so you can have whatever you'd like.
Nice.
It's super flexible. Here's a zipper. This is looking really Christmas themed for some reason. Is that feeling Christmas themed to you?
Yeah, Omar mentioned in the chat that it kind of feels like a gummy bear, and I agree. There's something that looks transparent or translucent about it.
Yeah, that's funny.
Pretty funny. So going back to how flexible it is, that's the big keynote of Substance to me, is just the foundation of flexibility and proceduralness that seems to go throughout everything with the app. That is just unbelievably powerful. As an observer watching it, pretty awesome.
Definitely. Okay, so you wanted a smiley face? Let's make a smiley face. Okay, so I'll choose a material. Well, I guess if we were doing it the non-destructive way, we could make a non-destructive smiley face.
Yeah, and then you can turn it into a frowny face real quick, show how flexible it is.
Oh, there we go. Perfect use case. So instead of that, I'll add a fill layer instead of a regular layer. Whoops. And here, I'll change the color. We can give it a blue smiley face. Actually, since it's sort of Christmassy colors already, let's make it green.
There you go.
Yeah.
Tie it into the season. I love it.
Okay, and then once we have the fill layer and we like what it looks like, then we can add a black mask. And then once we paint with white, we will be painting out that mask. So we get a smiley face right here.
Brilliant.
Yep, so that's the main mask. And if we wanted to do switch between smiley face and frowny face, then we could add paint effects to that mask. So if I add paint, if I right click on that, fill layer, add paint, here we can have a smiley face layer. Ooh, that is not my best smiley face. And then we can have a frowny face. Aww.
Omar says a happy gun, and then he's going to soon realize no.
And then, then you can either, put them on top of each other, switch between the two, work with different layers.
So could you make that green smiley face? On my end, it looks kind of just like a bright, diffuse color. Can you make that a metallic green in Substance, and what would that process look like?
Sure. Well, since we didn't use a regular layer, and since we're using a fill layer, then I can just say, okay, let's decrease the roughness, increase the metallic value, and you're done. So
That's awesome.
Yeah, very easy.
That's so easy. Yeah, and all of that, when you export it, all of that's piped in automatically to the correct map,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to just work. I mean, that's so nice. In Blender, I'd have to really think about, okay, so that's got to be metallic, so I've got to do the mask on the right map, and I've got to plug it into the right material, the right mix value, and all this stuff.
And you'd have to do it separately. Like, okay, now I got to paint the diffuse map. Now I got to paint the, metallic map. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really easy just to change colors, anything.
Definitely. Okay, a couple questions for you. This is from David. He's asking, when you go to the bake all textures in Substance Painter, since you baked the normal map in Blender first, do you just deselect the normal map option in Substance Painter at the beginning of the project?
Yes, I just uncheck that before I bake anything.
Okay.
That way it doesn't override it or whatever.
Yeah. And then we did have a question from Sabi404, but it was also answered by someone else. But he's asking, can you customize a brush like in Photoshop? And I think you had just shown that, or maybe right after he asked that question.
Absolutely. And then you can save all of those defaults as tools. And so any brush configuration that you like, you can always jump back to, and yeah, totally.
Man, the Photoshop of texture painting, of 3D texture painting.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Gosh, that's great. So it's about 5 till the top of the hour. Did you want to wrap things up?
Yeah, we can go through. I'll just bring this back into Blender and then answer any questions as we go.
Okay. Perfect. So yeah, guys, this is kind of last call for any questions. Ask me anything styled. Doesn't necessarily have to. Don't be limited to this particular stream or whatever. We try and make it big. Like, ask us anything. But anyway, while Lampel is demoing like the export process, just be thinking any last questions that you have.
Cool. So I just went to export textures, and since this gun will eventually be for Unity, I'll use the Unity configuration that is already totally standard there. I don't remember if there's a Blender. There is a Blender one. I didn't remember if I made that myself or if that came default, but it looks like there is, and there's base color, metallic, normal, roughness bump, everything that you need. But let's go to Unity, and then I'll show you how to configure things as well. Unity 5 standard metallic, and for example, I don't really need transparency for this. There's nothing here that's transparent, and so it's sort of just a waste of space. So if we go to the configuration tab and go down to Unity 5 standard metallic, then I can get rid of this one. The name is kind of long, so I will copy it so I don't have to type it again. Okay, and then I can get rid of this map and add a new one that's just RGB and not RGB plus alpha. And once I do that, I can rename it like so, and then find where our base color is, drag and drop that into the RGB slot, and apply that to the RGB. Whoops. I didn't want to do that. Okay, base color, RGB to the RGB channel. There we go. So once we have all of that laid out, then we can go back to the export process, and it won't actually update here, so I forgot to remove transparency. Okay, so once you change things here, it won't actually change anything in the export thing until you close and open it again. I don't want to do that, but just be aware. And then you can change the document size, anything. Somebody asked earlier about what you export, whether it's like 8-bit or bit depth or file format. I just export as PNG, pretty standard there. And I do 8-bit export. So since it's going straight to whatever the final use case is, so whether it's being plugged into Cycles for rendering or Unity for the game engine, you don't need any more than 8-bit, since this is like the final export. We're not going to be editing it further, and so that's why it's smaller bit. It's fine. So let's choose to do that right on my desktop.
Got a couple more questions for you.
Click export. Okay, let's do that while it's exporting.
Sweet. So
That was quick.
first we have what looks like a compliment from William Davis. Really, really solid guide and walkthrough with the workflow. So good job, Lampel.
Oh, thanks.
And then he has a question.
I was worried that it was kind of like too basic or like too, I don't know. It's like, what am I
dude,
showing?
that's what I love about streams is when you have to make a course, it's like you have to assume so much of what people actually want. But here, like they can tell you, I love that. Like, can you take a cube, bring it into Substance, draw a smiley face on it, and that tells him exactly what he needs to know, and apparently what other people wanted to know.
Hey, that's great. If that's helpful, happy to do it.
Yeah. Then he has a question. Has this been tested with real-time animation in Unity?
I mean, I don't know what the difference would be between that and working for a game. Can you expound on that or expand?
I got the impression like which you have in the trailer, you have a real-time turntable of the weapon. So
yes,
was that done in Unity?
No, that was actually an Eevee.
Oh, that's awesome.
Because I wanted to try that out.
Right, but also in the trailer, it shows there's a screen capture of him orbiting and it's also in the course, orbiting around the weapon, setting it up for use in Unity. So in that way, if that answers, it's definitely been tested and it's a proven method for texturing things for Unity.
Yeah, it's definitely for use in Unity. In terms of specifically for animation in Unity, I don't know what the particulars would be there, but it's same rendering engine, so yeah, same textures, same everything. It works great.
A couple more questions. One from Cheat and Ranjan. Can Substance Painter do cartoon style or NPR style?
Yes, totally. Which is, it's a good point, because a lot of the defaults and whatever are, have these like really gritty, grungy stuff.
Realistic, PBR style.
Yeah, and I think that was a good choice by Algorithmic, because typically computer graphics are super, clean, and, they always need more grunge. So by kind of caking it on first, you can, take it off later. But yeah, if you just add your own layers and you don't need to use any of the defaults, totally. Non-photorealistic is still awesome to use it with.
Yeah. And then potentially a big question. Are there any reasons why the FPS devlogs have stopped?
Well, mostly because progress is slowed. We've been working on courses since it's just the three of us, Kent, myself, and Jonathan Gonzalez. We need to kind of stagger things, so we work on the FPS, do some courses, work on the FPS, do some courses. So they will be coming back, but we need to figure out exactly how we want to finish up the project, and so expect more, but it just takes time.
Right. Yeah, and I'll support that the passion is absolutely still there to complete the project, and we're up to 5 courses now, I think, in that first person, or in that flow that's coming out of the first person shooter. So the process is still very much going, but it's hard to do both, make courses and make the game at the same time. So we've been doing it in sort of sprints where we'll work for like several weeks on just the game, and then reverse engineer that information into courses for the next couple months. And so we've just been in a course making mode in the last few months. So we are in talks to how we pick up production again, and we would love to do that for like a solid 2 months where we nonstop are working on it, for several reasons. To get practice ourselves as a game studio, because if we have actual experience doing that, then we're teaching you from actual experience. This isn't hypothetical. So we need some time to be able to focus on that. During those months, we want to do live streams of maybe as simple as literally the three of us on a voice call working on our own respective tasks. And so you can get you can ask questions and you can see exactly what it looks like for us to be working, in a real-time kind of environment. So we're early on in the process of talking about how we're going to go about that, but it's still very much a passion for us. So
totally,
hopefully it kicks back in.
Yeah, hopefully that answers that. And really quick before the other questions, what I was just doing while he was talking, drag and dropping the textures in, base color straight to the base color. I guess albedo to the base color. And then the metallic smoothness is the only tricky thing when you're exporting for Unity, because the metallic version is in the color channel, like the RGB, and then the smoothness is in the alpha channel. So you just need to plug the color spot into the metallic, the alpha to the roughness, but you need to invert it because it's smoothness to roughness. So just switch that around with an invert node, and make sure that's non-colored data as well. And the normal map as well, set that to non-colored data, plug that into a normal map, right into the normal, and we're good to go. So I will try a cycles preview. I don't know how well rendering works with streaming, but we'll just do it for a second. And yeah, there we go. It looks pretty much the same.
Excellent. At some point I paused your stream, I guess. Whoops.
Okay, well, I'll turn that off so it doesn't clog anything up. But yeah, I mean, so it's super easy. And the other thing about non-colored data is that should be pretty much anything except your albedo map, because that's just telling it that it's working in linear space. And so, yeah. I think they did that to not be confused, because you have non-colored data here, but then you also have linear as an interpolation, which is how the pixels are interpreted. So you have two things that should be set to linear, so I think they just called one of them non-color, just to make it not confusing, but still might be confusing. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I get confused by linear space and color spaces and all that stuff.
Oh man, it's a good topic for a different stream.
Right. I'm actually really impressed that you're able to render that size of a viewport and stream. Go to your computer. Oh, you just built a new one.
I did. Yeah, it's much better.
That's
I went
awesome.
for the 8-core Ryzen Threadripper that
smokes.
Steve, I think it was Steve Lund, recommended that.
Oh wow, dude,
He
that's
got the
great.
16-core, but I don't know. I went for the one that has higher clock speed but less cores. So we'll see. Balance it out.
Man.
Also, it's cheaper.
Golly, it's nice to have new toys.
Yeah, so much faster.
Cool, man. Well, I don't see any more questions. If you're done, maybe we can wrap it up. But it was a good stream. I learned a lot about Substance.
Sweet. Yeah, I had a couple notes, but I think we hit all of them. So yeah, I hope that was informative. Yeah, check out the course if you want to learn any more about this. This demo was pretty simplified. But yeah, it's a ton of fun. And then the exercise should be awesome, because you can either paint the rocket launcher and submit that as your exercise, or you can do the pistol, the rifle, or any gun that you made in the modeling course. So really the course is meant more for you to take that and apply it to something else rather than just following along step by step. And so I hope that comes across. So I'm definitely excited to see what you guys come up with, because it leaves it open for lots of creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. You'll enjoy the course. You should totally watch it. It's a good one.
Well, shucks.
Awesome.
All right. So with that, I think we're done. Thanks for hanging out with us today, and we'll see you probably next week. Oh, Kent, before we go, do you want to say a note about classes?
Oh yeah. I appreciate. Yeah, absolutely.
Let me bring your face back.
I guess we haven't announced it on social channels, but yesterday I posted a community thread that serves as a homepage for this new format called Classes that I'm actually super excited about, because we've started doing live streams and like they're not our traditional pre-recorded stuff. So how do you make them work together? And this class is that. It's based on, it's kind of like a workshop. If you guys were familiar when I did that, well, we've done several workshops, but I did one in particular a couple years ago, maybe a year ago. Anyway, it's kind of like this, except it's a shorter time frame, and it's using existing content, and it's open to all members. So all CG Cookie citizens are welcome to participate. But it's a method for sorry, I get excited. I'm trying to think of a concise way to put all this into terms rather than just bouncing around. But it's a method for all of us to work together on the same thing. Sometimes when I look at our course page, I'm like, it could be very lonely. You're learning from this course by yourself. You ask a comment or you post a question, and I don't see that for a week or something like that. And that just sucks. Like, it would be great to harness some of the classroom mentality of, we're all working on the same homework, we're listening to the same lectures, we are learning together. And so that's what the class is supposed to be. It's based on pre-recorded content that you can watch now. The first one's taking place in January, so you can start watching that now if you want. And then there's a community thread that's based, it's like the homepage. So this is where you go to ask questions in the specific weeks, post homework, and I'm going to be in that thread the entire month of January to offer advice or answer questions there. There's also going to be a weekly stream that coincides with the pre-recorded material. And that way, we're just trying to create this classroom feel, all learning together, real-time interaction with the instructor, and hopefully just to get the most out of the courses that we post. And as a community to be able to learn together. That's a big deal for me lately, is the streams have taught me, like, I mean, people are answering each other in the chat. Like, there's a big communal aspect to these. Sorry, I saw a comment in the chat. There's a big communal nature to these live streams, and so the classes represent the next level of that. And so anyway, very excited for that. Please check out the community thread. It's sticky, so it's at the top and it should be obvious, but participate in that in January. It's going to be a month devoted to specifically beginners to Blender and getting started with 3D modeling. That's a big entry point for a lot of people at CG Cookie. So we're gonna tackle that in January. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun. But
yeah, I'm super excited about that. I mean, one of the hardest things about, I don't know, teaching yourself or learning online is it does feel like you're kind of just doing it on your own. So having other people do it along with you, and being able to actually like talk to the instructor if you need to, just within the live streams, should be super fun. I'm excited too. So
cool, man. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for hanging out today, guys, and see you guys next week.